There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello Booktube, I'm Shawn the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with another Friday Reads. I think the alfresco season is finished in Saskatoon, but you know, one can hope. I wanted to do this one indoors here so you can see the bottom half of my new artwork on the wall, and here is a overlay of the full gorgeous painting. This is a painting that was a gift to me by Lindy and Lori. Lori, as you know, if you watch Lindy's Magpie Reads, and if you don't, what's wrong with you? Lori is a consummate, very gifted painter, and they gave this to me for, I'm not sure what, I didn't do very much for them, but I let my mom entertain them. I absolutely love it. It's the first piece of art in my new apartment. I have a few old Keith Harings in storage that I might put up, but I'm not obsessed with Keith Haring as I once was, and I think I would like to get some new pieces once I have some money. In the meantime, look at this! I love it. I love it so much. Do you think my blouse matches it? It was the best match I could find, so yes, so thank you, Lori and Lindy, very, very much for my fabulous new artwork. Then the next thing is Hilary Mantel died. What a shock. She was only 70. She had, how many more novels did she have in her? That was way too young. The best British novelist, the best English novelist of her generation. I just adored the first two of the, what's it called? The Cromwell series. I still haven't got to the third one. It's sitting, beckoning to me even more today with a little tear in its eye, now that Hilary Mantel is gone. But yeah, just wanted to say that she was a writer that meant a lot to me. I didn't know if I would like her historical series, and I absolutely loved it. I did it. It was my first audio text combo, I think, was reading Wolf Hall. And more recently I read her memoir, I forget the title, I'll put the gif up here, about her struggles with endometriosis, I believe. And that part of the narrative was gripping. There was other parts of it that didn't work as well for me, but it certainly gave me much more of a sense of who she was as a person. Hilary Mantel, rest in peace. I also wanted to briefly address the topic that the lovely Kim of Middle of the Book March addressed in a recent, I'm not sure it was a rant video, but it was, you know, it was a little bit ranty. It was a wise video about not exactly why we shouldn't put pressure on ourselves, but that when we blame other people, especially BookTube and other booktubers, for putting pressure on us to buy more books and read more books and keep up with the, you know, fear of missing out and all that stuff, that it's actually us that are doing it to ourselves. And I want to co-sign that, and also admit that I have been guilty of doing it to myself as well. It's one of the reasons that I don't publicize my number on Goodreads at the year end. I don't believe in fostering that kind of competitiveness or anything. Beginning in my second year on BookTube, I just stopped mentioning the number because I didn't want to add to that. I read a lot of books. This year it's going to be far less, but I just don't think that the number is important. And I actually had a really interesting discussion with a dear friend who I hadn't talked to for quite a while on the weekend. She admitted to me that she was feeling a little bit, I'm not sure that the word intimidated is the right word, but just feeling a bit weird about the fact that where she is in her life, she's not able to do nearly as much reading as she used to. She's been a voracious reader ever since I've known her, and certainly not as much reading as I'm doing. Well, in fact, 2022 has been a pretty low volume reading year for me, but I'm starting to make up for last time. Stay tuned, boys and girls. But we had a really good conversation about that, you know, because she basically said I just needed to say it out loud to realize how silly it is, and we really connected, had a great conversation. But readerly envy is a thing, and it's good to talk about it. I can think of countless booktubers who read tons more than I do, and also tons more of the kind of stuff I like, but it's not the only thing I like, so they read a whole bunch more. For example, new releases. Every year, for the last few years, I've made a video about the new releases I'm anticipating, that I'm looking forward to, and I only get to a small fraction of them, and I have booktuber friends who read a lot more new releases, if not almost exclusively new releases, and sometimes I feel envious of that, but I don't want to give up the backlist, boys and girls, especially my British women's fiction from 1930 to 1950 or whatever that era is that I gravitate towards. But Kim introduced a really important kind of psychodynamic aspect of this whole issue, which is we do it to ourselves. Don't blame anybody else. That being said, now I'm going to announce to you how many books I read this week. My weekly number I always announce, but my yearly, if you want to go back to every Friday reads and do the tally, you can figure out my yearly number, but I did have a fantastic reading week. There was one more thing I wanted to get into before I get into my reading week, which is, and you might want to sit down for this announcement because long-term viewers might be shocked. I'm not going to participate in Victober this year, with one small exception. I am going to do my own personal thing that I started maybe 2 years ago, which is to read a book about Queen Victoria or Queen Victoria adjacent as part of Victober, and I am going to do that. I'm not going to tell you about the book or anything this soon, but I don't have space in the reading life that I have created to take on any Victorian tomes, and there's a few short Victorian books, but I've either read them or I have no interest in reading them. I'm not going to read A Christmas Carol. So I'm just going to give it a pass this year. I love Victober. I love Victorian novels. This year I just don't have room. I have so many tomes in progress that if I added even one more tome of a Victorian novel to my reading list, there's no way that I would finish without not being able to try to read anything else for the rest of the year, other than what's in progress, plus one more Victorian novel. That's a non-starter. So I have very reluctantly decided that I just don't have time in my busy reading schedule to do it this year. And it's especially disappointing because Roz is one of the new co-hosts of Victober. So Roz, I hope we can still be friends, and I'll certainly do it up good next year for Victober. All right, now I've had a tremendous reading week. This is going to be a long Friday read, so fasten your seatbelts or go to the timestamps and skip around to what is of interest, because I have a lot to talk about. I have one bail. I have started, not including the books that I started and finished, I have started one, and I have finished 5, several of which I started and finished this week. So, without further ado, let's get at it. My bail is this 1936 British novel, British women's fiction from 1930 to 1950 people, and I've bailed on this 1936 novel on yellow paper by Stevie Smith. This is one of Barbara Pym's favorite novels. It shows up in each of her biographies, and I've read 3 as an important influence, and I didn't like it. I got to maybe 20% into it, and I just couldn't follow the story. It's stream of consciousness. I was reading the summary and reading a little bit of literary criticism to kind of get my bearings, and okay, I could get my bearings, but it just bugged me how elusive it was to things that I would have to Google in order to keep following the thread of the story, and I'm a person who loves to Google read. But with this one, it just bugged me. I guess that the allusions weren't to things that were particularly interesting to me. I just wasn't connecting with it, and I decided, you know what? Life's too short. I don't have to justify. I'm Shawn the Book Maniac. I'm the Empress of Bailing. I don't need to explain my process, do I? But I bailed. I may try it again, but it was just not accessible to me at this time anyway, so it's a bail. Maybe if it had been on green paper. And the book that I have started is for a pseudo-buddy read, and if you don't know what I mean by that, I will explain it. Oh, I think I misspoke earlier when I said I started one that I haven't finished. I've started 2 that I haven't finished. See, I've had a really exuberantly fabulous reading week, and I'm having trouble with the stats, people. Bear with me. The first one that I was worried I was going to forget because it's on ebook is the novel In the Distance by Hernan Diaz. And this is the pseudo-buddy reads with the wonderful Bernie of Bookstagram fame. I'll put his Instagram ID in the show notes. You must follow him. I do Friday reads. He does Fluffy Fridays. And of course, I had to make a pun or a joke about fluffers, and I won't tell you how that conversation ended because it's, he maybe doesn't want me to share that, but and a pseudo-buddy read is this new thing. I didn't invent it, I'm sure, but where we don't agree to a reading schedule other than a rough end date where we both will have read it. We don't check in on the first 5 chapters on this date and the next 5 chapters. None of that. And then we hook up on Zoom without having discussed the novel at all, and then talk about it, usually a recorded conversation for my channel or our channels. And so, yeah, that's what I call a pseudo buddy read, and I am going to be doing that in early October with Bernie. And this novel is starting out excellent. It is a historical novel. I think the period is definitely the 19th century. I'm not sure if it's early or mid 19th century, but this young Swedish guy, he and his brother, they've been given money that their parents got rather misbegottenly. Is that the word? No, ill-gottenly. Is ill-gottenly a word? Ill-gotten gains that the parents kind of got some money that wasn't particularly maybe ethical, but the reader was cheering for them all the way. They were very, very poor, and they gave that money to their 2 sons for passage to America to start a new life. And just at the docking place, I don't remember where that was it Sweden or wherever it was in Europe, before they were getting on the steerage ship or whatever, they got separated in the crowd of people, and he never found his brother, and he assumed he would find his way to the boat, so he went to the boat to meet him, and he never showed up. And so this guy, our protagonist, well, he's known in America as Hawk, because nobody can pronounce his name in 19th century America, and I can't really pronounce it now, but it's something like Hakon. And he encounters all kinds of misadventures, and it's really vividly told. It's really engrossing. I hope it's not just going to be an adventure story, but even if that's all it ends up being, I'm still really quite engaged with it. So nothing but good things to say about it. It's early days. And the other one is a reread, and this is a book that I'm reading on Voxer to Kendra. The Lost Garden by Helen Humphreys. Helen Humphreys is a Canadian writer of both fiction and non-fiction. In terms of her more recent stuff, I don't get on with her fiction, but I still love her non-fiction. But this is one of the best novels I've ever read, and maybe the last of hers that I liked, that I've tried. This is the only novel of hers that I've actually liked, and I didn't just like it, I loved it, and I'm reading it to Kendra. 6 chapters in, and it's a joy to read aloud. Because she's just such a gorgeous writer, and I just love the way her words roll off my tongue. It's set during the Blitz in London, and this protagonist, who's kind of a little bit frumpy, spinsterish, and she decides to leave London to get away from the Blitz and to go out to Devon, to a landed estate that has been given over to the military for the war effort, to supervise a bunch of land girls. And the land girls were, what were they? Maybe more officially known as the Women's Land Army. And it was a kind of an adjunct, kind of conscripted force where these women were conscripted to grow food for the war effort. And so it was the Women's Land Army. So it was like they cultivated and stuff. So this rich estate gave up their property for the duration of the war, and the land girls were going to plant potatoes. And I don't know if they were all for the soldiers or just for the general population, I don't know, but it was related to the war. I'm not explaining this very well because I don't know enough about it, but our protagonist is hired to go and supervise all of this. She's a horticulturalist, and up until that point, she had been studying a particular kind of canker on parsnips, parsnip canker, for years and years in the not laboratory, but in the, I guess the laboratory. And she never discovered how to cure it or whatever, and then she decides to take this job, get the hell out of London, and then plot ensues. And I'm just getting back into the story. I'm loving it so far, as much if not more than I did the first time. So those are the 2 that I've started. So 1 Bale, 2 that I've started, and 5 that I've finished, including several that I started. I'm just going to do them in the order that I finished them, I think. When I bailed on a novel on yellow paper, I got the bright idea that it was a couple hundred pages, and I was planning to finish it in time for this Friday Reads, and I didn't get very far into it before I bailed. So I thought, okay, I've got actually time to read a few, at least 2, maybe 3 shorties, extremely short shorties before my Friday Reads comes around, and that's exactly what I've done. So I've been spending a lot of time at the branch of the Saskatchewan Public Library that's only a 10-minute walk from my apartment. I find it really relaxing to go there and read, get out of the house, because otherwise I spend almost all my time at home alone, and I like that. But for a change, plus I have to often do things like photocopying or scanning documents for the immigration stuff, which is still progressing. And it's a way to go and people watch and be around books and also have my own space. And in fact, I've gotten into the habit of pulling one magazine off the shelf, off the display of magazines, and reading at least one article every time I visit to kind of broaden my horizons. I haven't gotten into the habit yet of spending time like that kind of time at the university library, but I will. So I am, my idea of getting out of the house is to go to the library and sit alone and read and look at cute boys. So the first one I started was a shortie that was on my shelf that I have long wanted to read. I believe it won the Man Booker last year, maybe the year before. At Night, All Blood is Black by David Diop, translated from the French by Anna Moschovakis. And I didn't realize until recently that she is the author of a lesbian novel that sat read on my shelf for years, and I think I might have on-hauled it. I think I might have sent it to Lindy. Lindy, did you ever read it? It's called Eleanor, or The Rejection of the Progress of Love. Did I send that to you? If not, I wonder if I kept it. I haven't quite got all my library on the shelves yet. But anyway, she's certainly a marvelous translator, and I really enjoyed this. I didn't love it. I give it 4 stars. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It was quite grotesque. I got a pretty strong stomach for that sort of thing. It was set in World War I. The point of view was fascinating. A Senegalese soldier. And it's based on historical fact, which actually I think was, once I did a little bit of research after I finished it, was even more interesting than the book. But a Senegalese soldier fighting in France with the French army and with a bunch of other African soldiers under the command of French. And it's gruesome, because any story about being a soldier in World War I is by necessity gruesome. But it's 100 times more gruesome because it's really focused on the stuff in your stomach getting blown out of your stomach, and then that's a real big part of the story is intestines all over the ground. Our narrator, I'm just going to describe the opening premise. The book opens with our narrator lying on the ground with his best friend, his childhood friend, who they went to the army together, and that guy has been mortally wounded, and all his innards are all out on the ground, and he's dying a slow and painful death. And he begs our narrator to kill him, to put him out of his misery, and then the narrator refuses for reasons that he comes to regret, ethics and civilization and all that stuff. And that has a really psyche warping effect on our narrator, and the story gets more gruesome from there. And that's all I'll say about the plot, other than that there's a whole bunch of stuff about colonialism that's woven through the already horrific story about World War I and being in the trenches. It was completely engaging, but I didn't love it. I'm really glad I read it. I'm really glad it was really short, because if it had been longer, I don't think I would have finished it. And I maybe didn't get as much out of it as other readers, like the jurors for the Man Booker International Prize or whatever it's called now. But I'll be thinking about it for a while. And then this is one of the books that I picked up at the library. I just went browsing through the fiction section. It's a branch library, so the fiction section's not very big. But I just was looking for the narrow little volumes. And I got this one and read it in one day. Was it yesterday? The day before yesterday. I read it alongside other stuff, but I read it from start to finish. I don't know that I have done that for a long, long time. I certainly don't do it very often. It's a novella, 130 pages, from Alberta, Canada. Happy Sands by the Alberta writer Barb Howard. I had never heard of her. I just loved the way this felt in my hand when I pulled it. The cover is fine, but it wasn't the cover really, but it was just a really nicely put together book. It's published by the University of Calgary. Barb Howard herself is a Calgary writer, and published by the University of Calgary, and they have a series called Brave and Brilliant series, which I'd never heard of, and there's 21, this was the 21st volume published under that series, and given how much I loved this, I want to check out the others. This was a 5-star read for me, and this, are you sitting down? It's another announcement that you need to be sitting down for, This is a beach read. Very self-consciously a beach read. Not deep literary fiction, whatever that means, but I loved it. So yes, Shawn finally found a beach read that he's not ashamed to tell you about. Well, I haven't been reading beach reads and not telling you, but yeah, this is actually about a summer holiday of a somewhat dysfunctional family from Calgary, and they go into BC, into the Okanagan, and they've been going to this, it's a pretty low budget holiday, a cabin place where you can rent cabins, and they go to the same place every year. The first person narrator is the mom. She's in middle age. She is quite funny. I'll get to that in a minute, but just to give you the premise. And she's a massage therapist, and so it's kind of a working holiday for her, even though she goes to relax and drink an awful lot. She also offers massages every summer to the same people that return year after year, and anybody else who's new. And so she makes enough money to keep her in booze for the week's holiday. So it's 7 chapters, 1 for each day, and it was just hilarious isn't the word. I smiled from start to finish. So I finally have a book. What is that tag, that annual tag? Is it the mid-year book freakout tag, or is it I think it is. A book that made you happy, and I always throw a hissy fit because I don't read to be happy. What the hell is that even all about? Well, this book made me happy. And really, thinking about it, because I get pushed back every year in the comments by people, good friends of mine, that say, are you really sure that none of the books you read make you happy? And so, on somewhat sober second thought, I'm sober now, by the way, I think, yeah, the novels of Barb Pym make me happy, I guess, because they're very entertaining, but there's also an undertow of sadness that is what makes me love them even more. But I love this. It was a not madcap. It was a very amusing story. I loved the narrator. I think it was really brave of the author to write somebody who was such a messy character that you couldn't help but love, and to not address in a really direct way, like for example her drinking problem. I thought that was a great thing to read about in literature, where it doesn't have some kind of she's going to stop drinking at the end or whatever. No, it's not like that. But the characters in the other, she's got a map. I think the map was a bit overkill because there's the resort. Am I showing it right? A very small little resort, and their cabin's in the middle, and blah, blah, blah. Well, 2 of the long-term people that come for the same week every year are a lesbian couple, very elderly. I don't know if they're in their 70s or 80s or what they are, but they were so funny. And one time, that may be the only other part of the story I'm going to tell you, is that our protagonist, Ginny, her name is Ginny, she needs to get something from them. She's collecting ice or something, I forget what it is, but she's really good friends with them, and she gives them both massages every year. She's known them for years, and she kind of walks into the cabin, hello, is anybody home? And then one of them peeks their head out of she can hear the shower running, and one of them peeks her head and says, what are you doing here? And they were having a shower together. I really, really enjoyed this. I want to read more by Barb Howard. I'm very curious to see, I know Lindy hasn't read this, according to Goodreads, but I'm wondering if she's read anything else by Barb Howard. But mostly I'm just delighted that I read a book that was nothing but amusement and just kind of a rollick of a story. The characters were quite vivid. I really liked the writing, and I loved that it didn't have a tidy ending. I mean, there was a bit of that. And in fact, people that care about plot more than I do might find some fault with some of the way the story resolved itself, or that this didn't necessarily work or whatever. And I'm not a person who cares so much about the plot, usually. I loved it. I really did. I can't stop laughing thinking about how much I loved this. Lindy and I are always giving each other books, and she brought a bunch of books for me on her recent visit. One of them was this tiny little booklet. It's just one short story by the Japanese writer Mieko Kawakami, Chandelier, translated by David Boyd, but not his partner. The other guy they co-translate. Sam Bett. This one is just translated by David Boyd, but it's David Boyd and Sam Bett have translated all of her novels. I think that's true. I know it is true of Breasts and Eggs. And I love the story. I actually loved it better than Breasts and Eggs. So with my half-assed, half-baked, weird little theory that some people agree with me on, thanks Amelia, that you're either an excellent short story writer or an excellent novelist, you cannot be both. I think that she might be more of a short story writer. This was tight, compressed, fascinating, strange, and I would apply some of those adjectives to her novel, Breasts and Eggs, but this is about a woman who grows up with a really screwed up family situation, not rich at all, surviving from temp job to temp job in Tokyo. But, and I won't explain why, but somehow she comes into some money. And it's not a lot of money, but for somebody of her social class and somebody of her age, it's quite a bit of money. And she stops working and spends all of her time in shopping malls in Tokyo. She doesn't go crazy buying a whole bunch of stuff. She doesn't spend all of her money very quickly, but she just lives at the shopping mall. Editing Shawn here. Clarification time. I don't mean that she lives at the shopping mall day and night, but she spends all of her day there. She doesn't do anything else except get up in the morning, go to the shopping mall, stay probably until it closes, and then goes home. And that's what the story's about. It's a really, really prescient anatomy of consumerism and all the stuff about having possessions and money and class in a very weird story with a weird narrator. And that's all I'm going to say about it. This, I think, just from the message that Mieko Kawakami writes at the beginning, I believe this is from Europa Editions, and I think this was a free giveaway. Lindy can correct it, my understanding in the comments if I don't have it right, but I think this was a kind of a promotion for Independent Bookstore Day that you could get at your local bookstore, your local independent bookstore, and that's where Lindy got it. I think that's it. And then she passed it on to me, and so I don't know if you can buy it. I haven't checked. So maybe you can buy it, or it's online somewhere, published online, or is an ebook. I have no idea, but I really recommend it. I liked it better than Breasts and Eggs, which I quite liked. This was a 5-star read for me. I have finally finished this. I started this for Pride Month, June. Okay, so June, July, August, September. Yes, just 4 months. Radiant Fugitives by Nawaaz Ahmed. It's a 2021 debut novel from America. Nawaaz Ahmed is a queer Muslim American writer, born in Tamil Nadu, as was one of the main characters here. For the last 100 or so pages, I was wrestling with this. Is this a 3-star read for me, or is it a 4-star read? And I still might change my mind, but I came down, unfortunately, on the side of a 3-star read. Now, I know that some of you people out there think a 3-star read is a decent book, but you're wrong. A 3-star book is not very good. And ultimately, this wasn't very good. But yet it had a lot of things going for it, too, and hence my struggle. It's quite a story. Seema is a queer Muslim Indian woman living in America, and she was rejected by her father when she came out on a visit back from where she was doing graduate work or something in London. She went back home to Tamil Nadu, and they were very, very, very close, and she came out to him and he just rejected her, just cut her out of his life completely. The estrangement was incredibly severe. And so then she goes to America, and she's got a messy personal life that reminded me quite a lot of how messy my personal life has been at times. It could never quite commit to any of the various partners, and she ends up befriending a black guy in the political, I think it was in the Howard Dean primary campaign. So that's, what are we talking, I can't remember the year of that, but you'll all remember if you're old enough to, or if you pay attention to that sort of thing. And she's kind of drawn to him, but she's not with anybody, and it takes quite a long time before they get together. And then their relationship is incredibly messy, and she gets pregnant, but is no longer with him by the time she realizes she's pregnant. And there's lots more narrative dipsy doodles about all that you can discover if you want to read this novel. And I do recommend it, a bit tepidly. And in the present of the story, the pregnant Seema is in, I think it's San Francisco, certainly California, San Francisco, and her very devoutly observant sister Tahara is there, and their mother, who is dying of cancer, is visiting them in San Francisco because it's her one chance to see them, and of course the father is nowhere in sight. Seema is so incredibly pregnant she can barely move, and we find out, I think it's on page 1, but certainly, let me see, make sure. Well, it's not revealed in the synopsis on the inside flap. It's certainly made clear, I think, by page 1 or 2. But I won't reveal it. I don't need to reveal it. But something very dramatic happens. And we know that from the very first chapter, if not the very first page. And I won't say what it is. I did a bite-sized chat with Sarah Hope about this, and I will link to that. I remember that she just reveals it. I mean, it's the very first chapter, people. But I'm not going to reveal it just to endear more of you spoiler-sensitive types to me. But I think I can continue to describe it without giving that away. The story was so interesting, and I liked the way that he brought politics into the novel and showed how deeply personal the political was for Seema and for her husband, her ex-husband, by the time the story gets to the present, with Howard Dean and then onto Obama, and how Seema felt as a lesbian being in a heterosexual relationship during the time that gay marriage was such a hot topic, and then when Obama wouldn't come out during the first campaign as being in support of it, and how she was disillusioned. I thought that part of the story was done quite well. Not perfectly, but I enjoyed that. I thought the characters were quite well done. The story was engaging, like it was a 3-star read, and I did finish it. So the characters kept me going, and those are the positives. The writing was quite good. The thing that bugged me the most by the end was that this novel didn't need to be this long. It's 368 pages, but it's really tiny type. I think if it had regular sized font, it would be more like a 500-page novel. And one of the reasons that it was such a swollen tome is because everything was explained over and over and over again. And because the writing was good and I was into the story and the characters, I didn't notice it for a long time. And then once I started to notice it, I realized what a flaw it was. Like, stop explaining, just show. If you just show and trust the reader to make connections instead of explaining every connection, it really had the feel of a socio-psychological profile of these characters rather than a deeply satisfying literary novel, unfortunately. And that was a major flaw for me. I also think the structure didn't work. I think it was a mistake to reveal what happens at the end of the story if you look at the story chronologically at the very beginning. I think that just didn't work particularly well for me. And the narrator of the story is Seema's unborn baby. And that got a little bit old, too. It didn't ruin it for me, but when you add up all the flaws, 3-star read. The other thing was, and this I am not going to worry about withholding. In fact, I've already told you that Seema's father back in Tamil Nadu, who she was devoted to and who he was the apple of her eye, rejects her so vehemently, with such finality. And that is only hinted at until about 4/5 of the way through the book. And I thought that was ridiculous. It was obvious that that's what this trauma between the father and the daughter was about, but so why not come out and say it? It didn't create any suspense. It was so obvious that that's what had happened, so that by the time he gets into describing that scene, he botched it, because he was comparing that to, I think, a scene between her and her mother, or I forget what it was. Some of the most dramatic moments were the least well written in the book, too. So it was a really interesting story. There was quite a bit of it that was well done, but I was not emotionally invested because of all the flaws. And I did finish it. I guess I don't regret finishing it. I think he's a talented writer. This was his debut, and I think he bit off more that he could chew. And finally, the book I finished this just about 90 minutes ago, and about 60 minutes ago, I finished this little shorty that was on my shelf. I love buying books, and I think it's especially about used books for me. I bought quite a few used books in Tokyo that sat on my shelf for years, and this one came all the way back to Canada with me, and I finally pulled it off the shelf and read it, and I think I got this at that same Japanese language philosophy store that had a foreign book section outside their shop. And I bought so many interesting novels for like $1 or $2 each there. And I think that's where I got this one. I may not be remembering correctly, but I bought it used in Tokyo. I remember I got a whole bunch by this author at the same time. And here it is. It is a memoir by the American writer Mary McCarthy. Intellectual Memoirs, New York, 1936 to 1938. I have read her most well-known novel, The Group, a couple years ago. Absolutely loved it, and I didn't really know much about her before, and now I know quite a bit more about her after reading this memoir. I think the title is not accurate. I think the timeline is accurate, 1936, 1938, but oh my God, this was dishy and very, not erotic, but it was about her sex life, her personal life, as much as it was about the intellectual stuff. So thank God, because if it was only about her intellectual experience during those years, I wouldn't have finished it. It was very dramatic, really well written, and written at the end of her life. I think she died in 1989, and I think this was the last thing that she wrote. I have not read the foreword by Elizabeth Hardwick yet, but it was published posthumously, and I believe it was the last book she wrote. Certainly it was near the end of her life, and she didn't have a whole lot figured out. And I appreciated that about the book too. At the same time as thinking, oh, Mary, it's pretty obvious to me what this was about, and you're still at the age of however old she was, 80 or 90, still confused about this, but yet I also appreciated that candor, that she was still confused about things that had happened way back in the 30s, especially with her sex life and her love life, and the fact that she cheated on all of her partners, and she would move from one partner to the next, whether it was a husband or she was shacked up with the guy that ended up becoming the founding editor of the Partisan Review, Rav, I believe. I can't remember his name, but anyway, and he was married, and he was shacked up with his mistress, Mary McCarthy, and then she ended up sleeping with the new guy that got involved with the journal, the preeminent Marxist scholar, and I don't know what all he was, writer, Edmund Wilson. She wasn't attracted to him at all, but she started sleeping with him, and there's many pages in this short little memoir about why the hell did I sleep with him? I wasn't attracted to him. That was just fascinating to read. A little bit about her reading life and about her writing life. There's a fabulous confession that she makes that she was hired by, I think it was The Nation, with another reviewer on staff, another female reviewer on staff, Margaret somebody, to write a series of articles critiquing American literary criticism. And they were to collaborate on it, and they would both get a byline. But her partner, Margaret, I can't remember her name, but I Googled her once I got to that part in this book. And she was a real person, obviously. She got writer's block, terribly. And Mary McCarthy ended up writing the whole series, but it was both of their bylines. And they stayed friends, but they were not close friends, but she really came to her co-worker's aid. And her co-worker got half the credit for this fairly groundbreaking series of, not an expose, but a critique of American literary criticism. That was a fascinating part. So much about this. It's a short read. I really recommend it. It introduced me to a lot of writers that I didn't know much about that I want to read now. Delmore Schwartz being one of them, but many others. And it's gotten me quite fascinated by Mary McCarthy, the person. And I know that there's some biographies, and I think her son with Edmund Wilson has written a memoir. Yeah, I think I might have to go down a Mary McCarthy rabbit hole in my future reading life. Loved it. So that's what I've read. So very briefly, I'm going to start only 2 books this week, and my goal this week, aside from finishing In the Distance by Hernan Diaz, so that I can have a Zoom chat with Bernie, is to finish 2 massive tomes, both of which I'm 20% or less of the way in. So I'm going to be very focused in what I read in the coming week. But I am going to start two others. This is also from the library. What is up with Shawn the Book Maniac borrowing books from the library after he said that he never does that sort of thing because they're not very aesthetically appealing? Well, here is a new release from this year, and you know, it is not nearly as beautiful as it would be if I bought it, but I can't afford to buy graphic novels. Our Colors by Gengoroh Tagame, translated by Anne Ishii. I know Greg's read it. I think I remember that he liked it. It's, 500 pages, but it's this kind of a thing. It won't take me too terribly long, and I got it from the library. This will not be my last short book that I'm reading before the end of the year, but it will probably be the last one that I fit in before Shorty September is no more. And it's a book that I got last year and I've been wanting to get to ever since, and I'm finally going to this week. The German novel, The Peacock by Isabel Bogdan, translated from the German by Annie Rutherford. I watched on Zoom the book launch for this book. It's such a crazy story. A bunch of German businessmen go to Scotland for a business conference at a retreat. I think it's at a Scottish castle. And then there's a peacock on the grounds of this historical place that they're having their conference or their retreat at. And the peacock goes a little bit crazy and causes all kinds of havoc. And that's the opening premise. So, got to find out more about this. So I'm finally going to start it. All right, well, it was one of the best reading weeks of the year for me, and I hope there's been something of interest in my report thereon for you. Thanks for watching.